Part 3 of the BPPP Instructor Camp deals with two of the most dangerous flight characteristics that can have serious consequences for the pilot if they're not mitigated. The departure stall, mostly as trimmed stall in a go-around or as in a missed approach. And the second, the spiral demonstration, the nuanced discussion were by our intrepid instructor, Tom Turner.
We're going to talk about departure stalls. Power-on stalls are very difficult to do in most high-performance airplanes. As a matter of fact, the FAA has recommendations to do them at reduced power so that the airplane will stall sooner without climbing so rapidly. And in order to do a departure stall, we have to pull the nose of the airplane up very, very steeply. So whether it's intended or not, we get the impression that in order for an airplane to stall with power applied, with full power, the airplane would have to be in a very unnaturally high pitch attitude, and that the pilot would have to really force it to go into the stall. I'm guilty for decades of training people, telling people in flight instruction that I know this is unrealistic, but let's do a power-on stall. And yet, if you look at NTSB records, stalls with power applied, full power stalls, are the most common fatal scenario in all general aviation airplanes. Anything from Piper Cubs through Cessna Citations, and certainly in the Bonanzas and Barons. It took me a long time to wrap my head around how something that is so hard to do is the leading killer of pilots in our class of airplane. And then it occurred to me, when those power-on, those real-world power-on stalls occur, and they occur at the beginning of a go-around, I had an epiphany. There is a difference, there's significant difference in the airplane configuration between the way we train and evaluate stalls and the way they happen in the real world. Because in the training world, we do it with the gear up and the flaps up. Where real-world stalls occur, the landing gear is down and the flaps are usually fully down as well. So I took a Bonanza up and I practiced with it. I put the airplane in the full landing configuration as if I were going to do a power off stall, and trimmed the airplane like I would be doing on final approach. So I'm in a 500 or 600 foot per minute rate of descent. I've got the power at idle, full flaps gear down, trim the airplane, and in the 836, that's usually in a training configuration going to be about 9 to 12 units up. So fairly nose-high trim setting. Then I did a fairly abrupt power application, as if some deer ran out on the runway in front of me and I did something of an almost panic go-around maneuver. And what happens with the trim in that position when you apply full power is the airplane pitches up very dramatically. You will get the first stall indication, the first stall warning horn, about as the nose comes through the horizon. And if you don't give it a significant push forward to prevent it from pitching up rapidly, the airplane is going to give you initial indications of stall at somewhere between 7 to 10 degrees nose up, which is the normal pitch attitude you're looking for in a go-around. So in addition to the standard presentation of power off and power on stalls that I present, I also show people what's sometimes called the trimmed stall. The way that the airplane will perform at the beginning of a go-around if you're not ready for it, and the way that unfortunately is the most common cause of fatal mishaps in Beech airplanes. situations we do in BPPP initial training is the spiraling tendency of the aircraft. Basically, if the airplane gets beyond a 35 to 40 degree bank angle, it gets into a steep bank attitude, and the pilot does not correct for the natural tendency of the airplane, it will begin to go into a spiral, and it will very rapidly devolve into a very nose-low attitude, very high angle of bank, and a very high rate of descent. We teach the recovery from that, leveling the wings, putting the lift back into the vertical plane, resisting the pitch-up tendency with forward pressure to recover from it. Normally, when we talk about spirals, and most instructors talk about spirals, we relate that to VFR into IMC penetration and loss of control, or sometimes an instrument pilot who blunders into a thunderstorm and in extreme turbulence loses control of the airplane. And in both of those cases, if the bank angle is allowed to get beyond 30 degrees or so, and the pilot does not compensate for the airplane's tendency to go into a spiral, it will in fact enter that spiral, which can result in overstressing the airplane or enough altitude loss that you impact the ground. So those are the situations we normally talk about spirals. I think that spirals are also a factor in a lot of maybe more normal situations that we see. The first is a circling instrument approach. The circling maneuver of an instrument approach is considered to be one of the riskiest things that we might do as an IFR pilot. During the circling maneuver, we're down close to the ground, we're in close to the runway because visibility and cloud clearance requires it. Otherwise we wouldn't have to do a circle maneuver. And our attention is focused primarily on the runway. We need to keep the airport in sight, and that usually means the runway itself. So we're flying along low and tight to this airport, the runway is sliding by, and it's time to start turning inbound to align with the runway. If your attention is still focused on that runway and you're not cross-checking what's going in the cockpit, this low and tight position makes it common for a pilot to want to go into a very steep bank angle. If you get beyond about 30 or 35 degrees bank angle and you don't give it a little power or the additional back pressure it needs, the airplane will go into that spiral, that incipient spiral right away. And in just a very few seconds, you'll be down at 1,000 or 1,500 foot per minute. In the circle maneuver, you're starting this from 500 or 600 feet above ground level. So you could potentially impact the ground quite rapidly. The same thing might happen flying visually into a dark hole approach. If all you have is a rectangle of lights around a runway for reference, you can get into exactly that that same scenario as well. So I think that spirals are as much a hazard, or maybe even more hazard, in these more normal airport environment scenarios than they might be in the things that we normally talk about.